The moment Hannah Grayson stepped off the stagecoach in Bismarck, North Dakota, her heart hammered against her ribs like a wild bird trapped in a cage. But it was nothing compared to the sickening lurch she felt when she saw the expression on her intended husband's face. It was June of 1881, and the dusty streets of this frontier town buzzed with activity as ranchers, merchants, and townsfolk went about their business under the wide Dakota sky. Hannah smoothed down her best traveling dress, a modest blue cotton with white lace at the collar that she had spent weeks preparing, and tried to smile at the tall man who stood near the church steps with his arms crossed over his chest. "You are not what I expected," Thomas Whitmore said flatly, his eyes sweeping over her with obvious disappointment. His letters had been cordial enough, though perhaps a bit formal, but there had been nothing to prepare Hannah for the cold rejection she saw in his pale eyes now. Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. She had traveled over 1,000 miles from Pennsylvania, leaving behind everything she knew after her father's death left her with nothing but debts and distant relatives who saw her as a burden. The advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like providence, a chance for a new beginning. She had corresponded with Thomas for 3 months, pouring her hopes into carefully penned letters, and he had seemed pleased enough with the exchange to send money for her passage west. "I do not understand," Hannah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Around them, curious onlookers had begun to gather, drawn by the obvious tension. "Your letters said my letters were written based on what you told me," Thomas interrupted sharply. "You said you were accomplished in all domestic arts, that you came from a respectable family with means. You look like a pauper, Miss Grayson, and I have it on good authority that your father died owing money to half of Philadelphia." The words struck Hannah like physical blows. Her cheeks burned with humiliation as murmurs rippled through the growing crowd. The Reverend Blackwell had emerged from the church, his expression troubled as he took in the scene. Hannah had met him briefly when she arrived, and he had seemed kind, speaking gently about the ceremony that was to take place within the hour. "I never claimed my family had means," Hannah said, finding her voice despite the trembling in her limbs. "I told you honestly about my circumstances. And I am accomplished. I can cook, so keep a home, tend a garden." "You are a liar and a gold digger," Thomas said with finality. "I will not marry you. The arrangement is void." The words hung in the hot summer air like a death sentence. Hannah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She had no money for return passage, no family to wire for help, nothing but the small trunk of belongings that the stagecoach driver had deposited on the wooden sidewalk. The crowd's whispers grew louder, a mix of pity and scandal-hungry gossip. "Mr. Whitmore, perhaps we should discuss this privately," Reverend Blackwell began, but Thomas was already turning away. "There is nothing to discuss. I have standards, Reverend, and I will not be trapped into marriage by false pretenses." Hannah wanted to collapse, to disappear into the dusty earth, but something in her refused to give Thomas Whitmore the satisfaction of seeing her completely destroyed. She lifted her chin, blinking back the hot tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks. "I wrote nothing but truth in my letters. If you found me wanting, that is your prerogative, but do not dare call me a liar when your own words promised Christian kindness and a fair partnership." A few voices in the crowd murmured approval at her spirit, but it did nothing to change her desperate situation. Thomas merely shrugged and walked away, his boots thudding against the wooden planks as he headed toward the saloon across the street. Hannah stood frozen, watching her future disappear with every step he took. "Miss Grayson," Reverend Blackwell said gently, reaching out as if to steady her. "I am deeply sorry. This is most irregular and unkind. Perhaps there is somewhere you can stay while we sort out." I will marry you right now." The deep voice cut through the awkward silence, and every head turned toward its source. A man stepped forward from the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his worn work shirt. His face was angular and strong, marked by a few days' worth of stubble, and his eyes were an unusual shade of amber that seemed to catch the afternoon light. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, his movements deliberate as he approached Hannah and the Reverend. "Mason Ziegler," someone in the crowd whispered. "That is old Richard Ziegler's boy, owns the Double Z Ranch south of town." Hannah stared at the stranger, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Mason Ziegler stopped a respectful distance away, removing his hat to reveal more of that dark hair, disheveled from a day's work. His gaze met hers directly, and she saw no pity there, only a calm certainty that was somehow more unnerving than Thomas's rejection. "You do not know me," Hannah managed to say, her voice hoarse. "Why would you?" "I know enough," Mason said simply. His voice had a roughness to it like whiskey and smoke, but there was warmth underneath. "I know you have come a long way on faith and courage. I know Whitmore is a fool who does not deserve you. I know you need a husband and I need a wife." He paused, his amber eyes searching her face. "I own a ranch about 10 miles south of here. It is hard work and the house needs a woman's touch, but it is a good life. Honest. I can promise you that." The crowd had gone completely silent now, hanging on every word of this unexpected drama. Hannah felt dizzy with the rapid turn of events. One moment she had been utterly ruined, and now this stranger was offering her exactly what she had come west to find. But the memory of Thomas's cruel rejection was still fresh, and suspicion crept into her thoughts. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "What is wrong with you that you would marry a woman you have never met?" A few people gasped at her directness, but Mason's expression did not change. If anything, a hint of something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. "Nothing wrong that I know of, though I reckon you will form your own opinion on that. Truth is, Miss Grayson, I have been too busy building up the ranch to go courting properly. My mother passed 2 years back, and the house has been empty of a woman's presence since. I am 31 years old, and it is time I had a family. You are looking for a home and a husband. Seems to me we could help each other." It was the most practical, unromantic proposal Hannah could have imagined, but there was an honesty to it that Thomas's flowery letters had lacked. She studied Mason Ziegler's face, trying to read the man behind those amber eyes. He looked tired, she realized, with fine lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun, and calluses visible on his hands where they gripped his hat. This was a man who worked hard, who knew the value of plain speaking. "You could be a murderer for all I know," Hannah said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "Or cruel or a drunkard." "Could be," Mason agreed. "But I am not. Reverend Blackwell here has known me since I was a boy. He can vouch for my character if that would ease your mind." All eyes turned to the Reverend, who looked somewhat overwhelmed by the turn of events but nodded slowly. "Mason Ziegler is a good man, Miss Grayson. Hard-working, honest, respected in the community. His parents were fine people, and he has built his ranch into one of the most successful in the territory through sheer determination. I would not hesitate to recommend him as a husband." Hannah's mind raced. She had no other options, no money, nowhere to go. She could accept Mason's offer or face destitution in a strange town. But beyond the practical considerations, something in his steady gaze called to her. He had stepped forward when no one else had, offering her dignity when Thomas had tried to strip it away. That had to mean something. "If I agree," Hannah said slowly, "I want your word that you will treat me with respect, that you will not hold this day against me or throw my circumstances in my face when you are angry." "You have it," Mason said without hesitation. "I give you my word." The crowd waited, dozens of people holding their breath as Hannah Grayson made the decision that would determine the course of her life. She thought of her father, who had always told her that character revealed itself in crisis. Thomas Whitmore had shown his character today, and so had Mason Ziegler. She could only pray she was making the right choice. "Then yes," Hannah said, her voice gaining strength. "I will marry you, Mr. Ziegler." A ripple of excited chatter swept through the onlookers. Mason's expression softened into something that might have been relief, and he offered her a small nod of acknowledgement. "Thank you, Miss Grayson. I will do my best to be a good husband to you." Reverend Blackwell cleared his throat, clearly trying to regain control of the extraordinary situation. "Well then, I suppose we should proceed with the ceremony, though perhaps the participants might benefit from a few moments to collect themselves." "No," Hannah said firmly, before she could lose her nerve. "Let us do it now before anything else can go wrong." Mason's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I am ready if you are." And so, 15 minutes later, Hannah Grayson found herself standing at the altar of the small church in Bismarck, North Dakota, beside a man whose first name she had only learned minutes before. The church had filled with curious townspeople, eager to witness this unprecedented turn of events. Hannah was acutely aware of the whispers and stares, but she kept her eyes forward, focusing on the Reverend's words as he began the ceremony. Mason stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool interior of the church. He had taken a few moments to brush the worst of the dust from his clothes and run his fingers through his hair, but he still looked like a man who had been interrupted in the middle of a workday. There was something reassuring about that, about his willingness to drop everything and commit to this marriage without pretense or preparation. The ceremony was brief and simple. When it came time to exchange vows, Mason's voice was steady and clear, his amber eyes never leaving Hannah's face. She repeated her own vows in a voice that trembled only slightly, and then Mason was slipping a plain gold band onto her finger. It was slightly too large, she noticed with a strange detachment, and he frowned slightly at that. "It was my mother's," he murmured, "for her ears alone." "We will get you one that fits properly." Before Hannah could respond, Reverend Blackwell was pronouncing them man and wife. "You may kiss your bride," he said, and Hannah's heart jumped into her throat. Mason hesitated for just a moment, reading the uncertainty in her eyes, then leaned down and pressed a brief, chaste kiss to her lips. It was over almost before it began, but Hannah felt the warmth of it spread through her chest. The crowd applauded, and just like that, she was no longer Hannah Grayson but Hannah Ziegler, wife of a rancher she had known for less than an hour. The next several minutes passed in a blur of congratulations and curious questions from the townspeople. A few women approached Hannah with sympathetic expressions, offering advice and welcome. One older woman with kind eyes and silver hair introduced herself as Martha Henderson, the owner of the general store. "You must come visit me tomorrow, dear," Martha said warmly. "I will make sure you have everything you need to set up your household properly, and do not let the gossips trouble you. What happened today took courage, and courage is something we value out here." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes at the kindness. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. That means more than you know." Mason appeared at her elbow, having extracted himself from a conversation with several ranchers who had been peppering him with questions and ribald jokes. "We should be heading back to the ranch," he said quietly. "It is a good ride, and I would like to get you settled before dark." Hannah nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. The long journey, the shock of rejection, and now this hasty marriage had drained her completely. Mason must have seen it in her face because his expression gentled. "Come on, Mrs. Ziegler," he said, offering her his arm. "Let us go home." The words sent a strange flutter through Hannah's stomach. Home. She had not had a real home since her father died. The idea that she might have one again, even under these bizarre circumstances, was almost too much to hope for. Mason's wagon was parked near the church, a sturdy vehicle pulled by two well-cared-for horses. He helped Hannah up onto the seat with careful courtesy, then loaded her trunk into the back. Several people called out farewells and good wishes as they pulled away from the church, and Hannah found herself waving back automatically, still dazed by the rapid turn her life had taken. As they left the bustling streets of Bismarck behind, heading south into the rolling prairie, an awkward silence settled between them. Hannah studied her new husband from the corner of her eye, trying to reconcile the reality of her situation. This morning, she had been a mail-order bride traveling to meet a stranger. Now she was a married woman heading to a ranch with a different stranger, one who had saved her from complete ruin, but whose motivations she still did not fully understand. "You must think me very foolish," Hannah said finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. "To have come all this way for a man I had never met." Mason glanced at her, his strong hand steady on the reins. "No more foolish than me offering to marry a woman I had never met," he said. "Takes courage to start over, Mrs. Ziegler. Nothing foolish about that." "You could have had your pick of women, I imagine," Hannah said. "The Reverend spoke well of you and you clearly have a successful ranch. Why rescue me? Why not court someone properly?" Mason was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the late afternoon sun painted the grasslands in shades of gold. "I told you the truth back there," he said finally. "I have been too busy to court, but it is more than that, I suppose. This land, this life, it requires a certain kind of person, someone willing to work hard, to face difficulties without giving up. When I saw you standing up to Whitmore, refusing to let him completely crush your spirit, I figured you might be that kind of person." Hannah absorbed this, feeling an unexpected warmth at his words. "I do not give up easily," she admitted. "My father used to say I was stubborn as a mule." "Good," Mason said, and she caught the hint of a smile tugging at his mouth. "You will need to be out here." They rode in more comfortable silence after that, and Hannah took the opportunity to study the landscape around them. The Dakota territory was unlike anything she had known in Pennsylvania. The land stretched out in every direction, vast and open under an enormous sky. Rolling prairie grass rippled like waves in the wind, and here and there she could see cattle grazing in the distance. It was beautiful in a stark, lonely way, and Hannah felt something in her chest expand at the sheer scope of it. After about an hour, Mason pointed ahead. "There. That is the Double Z." Hannah followed his gaze and saw buildings emerging from the landscape. A house stood at the center, 2 stories tall and built of sturdy timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Nearby were a large barn, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals where she could see horses moving about. It was larger and more substantial than she had expected, evidence of the hard work Mason had mentioned. As they drew closer, Hannah could see that while the buildings were well maintained, there were signs of neglect in the details: overgrown flower beds near the house, faded curtains in the windows, a general air of masculine functionality without any softness. Mason had told the truth about needing a woman's touch. A dog barked as they approached, and a shaggy brown and white creature came bounding up to the wagon, tail wagging furiously. Mason laughed, the sound warm and genuine, and Hannah realized it was the first time she had heard him truly laugh. "That is Bear," Mason said. "Terrible guard dog, but good company." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and jumped down, then came around to help Hannah descend. His hands were warm and strong at her waist as he lifted her down, and for a moment they stood very close, his amber eyes searching hers. "Welcome home, Hannah," he said softly, and the use of her first name sent a little shiver through her. The interior of the house was clean but sparse, with the kind of basic furnishings that spoke of male practicality rather than any attempt at comfort or beauty. The front door opened directly into a large main room that served as both parlor and dining area, with a kitchen visible through a doorway to the left. The furniture was solid and well-made but worn, and there were no curtains, no decorations, no softness anywhere. "I know it is not much to look at right now," Mason said, watching Hannah's reaction carefully, "but you should feel free to make whatever changes you want. There is an account at Henderson's store in town, Martha's Place. You can order whatever you need to make the house into a proper home." Hannah walked slowly through the room, taking it all in. Despite its starkness, the house had good bones. The floors were solid wood, well fitted and level. The walls were straight and free of cracks. The stone fireplace was large and well built. With some work and attention, it could be quite lovely. "It is a good house," she said honestly, turning to face Mason. "I can work with this." Relief flickered across his face. "Let me show you the rest." He led her through the downstairs, pointing out the kitchen with its large cast iron stove, the pantry that was reasonably well stocked with basics, and a small room off the kitchen that he explained had been his mother's sewing room. Upstairs, there were 4 bedrooms, though only one appeared to be in use. Mason stopped outside the door of the master bedroom, and Hannah saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his face for the first time since he had offered to marry her. "This is my room," he said, then gestured to the room across the hall. "That was my parents' room, but it is empty now. I assumed you would want your own space, until we know each other better." Hannah felt a rush of gratitude that nearly brought tears to her eyes. She had been dreading this moment, unsure what expectations Mason might have of their wedding night. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I appreciate your consideration." Mason nodded, looking relieved that she had not taken offense. "I will bring your trunk up and let you settle in. There is water in the pitcher, and I am sure you would like to freshen up after the long journey. Take your time. I need to check on the cattle and speak with my foreman before supper anyway." He carried her trunk into the empty bedroom, which was larger than the one he occupied and had windows facing south and west that let in the golden afternoon light. After he left, Hannah sank down onto the bed, a large 4-poster that had been stripped of linens but appeared sound, and finally allowed herself to process everything that had happened. This morning she had been Hannah Grayson, alone and frightened. Now she was Hannah Ziegler, wife of a rancher, mistress of a house that needed her care. It was not the romantic story she might have dreamed of, but Mason seemed to be a good man, and she had a chance to build something real here. It was more than she had any right to hope for after the disaster with Thomas Whitmore. With that thought, Hannah stood and began to unpack, determined to make the best of the opportunity she had been given. Over the next several weeks, Hannah threw herself into transforming the house into a real home. True to his word, Mason gave her free rein to make whatever changes she wanted, and she took full advantage. Her first trip to Martha Henderson's store in town resulted in fabric for curtains, seeds for a kitchen garden, and various household items that the house had been lacking. Martha proved to be a valuable ally, offering advice on what worked well in the harsh Dakota climate and what did not. Hannah rose before dawn each day, determined to prove that Mason had not made a mistake in marrying her. She cooked hearty meals, scrubbed floors, beat rugs, and slowly brought color and comfort into the austere spaces. She planted a vegetable garden near the kitchen door and coaxed the neglected flower beds back to life. The physical work was exhausting, but there was satisfaction in seeing the results of her labor. Mason was gone for most of each day, working the ranch with his foreman, a weathered man named Charlie who had worked for Mason's father. In the evenings, Mason would return tired and dusty, but he always took time to notice the changes Hannah had made, offering quiet compliments that made her feel valued. They ate supper together, and slowly, tentatively, they began to talk about her life in Pennsylvania, about his childhood on the ranch, about the challenges of making a living on the frontier. Hannah learned that Mason's father had died 5 years earlier, leaving Mason to run the ranch alone. His mother had held on for 3 more years before succumbing to pneumonia during a harsh winter. The grief was still visible in Mason's eyes when he spoke of them, and Hannah understood why the house had felt so empty. It was not just the lack of decorations. It was the absence of the family that had made it a home. One evening, about 3 weeks after their marriage, Hannah was cleaning up after supper when Mason appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Leave that," he said. "Come outside with me." Curious, Hannah dried her hands and followed him out to the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and the prairie stretched out before them like a golden sea. Mason leaned against the porch rail, his profile gilded by the fading light. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly, "for everything you have done. The house feels like a home again." Hannah joined him at the rail, maintaining a careful distance between them. Despite weeks of living together, they still moved around each other with polite formality, like strangers sharing space rather than husband and wife. "I am glad I could help. You have given me so much, Mason. A home, security, a purpose. It is the least I can do." Mason turned to look at her, his amber eyes intense in the twilight. "You have given me more than you know. I did not realize how lonely I had been until you arrived and filled the silence." Hannah's breath caught in her throat. The words were simple, but the emotion behind them was unmistakable. For the first time, she allowed herself to really look at her husband, to see past the practical arrangement they had made to the man beneath. Mason Ziegler was handsome in a rugged way, with his strong features and sun-darkened skin. But more than that, he was kind and honorable, working himself to exhaustion each day to provide for her without ever asking for anything in return except her company at meals. "I was lonely too," Hannah admitted softly. "After my father died, I felt so lost. Coming here, having work to do and a place to belong at has given me back something I thought I had lost." They stood together in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead, and Hannah felt something shift between them. The careful distance they had maintained was beginning to feel less like safety and more like a barrier keeping them from something that could be real and good. As summer deepened, Hannah fell into the rhythms of ranch life. She learned to time her meals to the work schedule, to preserve food for the harsh winter that everyone assured her was coming, to make soap and candles and all the other necessities of frontier living. Martha Henderson became a true friend, stopping by for tea whenever she could spare time from the store, bringing gossip and advice in equal measure. Through Martha, Hannah learned more about Mason's history. How he had worked alongside his father from the time he was old enough to sit a horse, learning everything about ranching. How he had courted a girl named Sarah when he was 22, only to have her run off with a gambler passing through town. How he had poured all his energy into the ranch after that, building it into one of the most successful operations in the territory. "He is a good man who has had his share of heartache," Martha told Hannah over tea one afternoon. "His mother used to worry that he would never open his heart again. I think she would be glad to know he found you." The word stayed with Hannah. She found herself watching Mason more carefully, noticing the small kindnesses he showed, the way he always made sure she had enough firewood, the way he fixed the squeaky hinge on the pantry door without her asking, the way his eyes would search her face when he thought she was not looking, as if trying to read her thoughts. For her part, Hannah began to feel something stirring in her chest whenever Mason was near. The practical arrangement they had made was evolving into something deeper, though neither of them had acknowledged it aloud. She found herself lingering over his laundry, noticing the scent of leather and sun and honest sweat that clung to his clothes. She took extra care with his favorite meals, pleased by the genuine appreciation in his eyes when she served them. One hot afternoon in July, Hannah decided to bring lunch out to the men working in the far pasture. She packed cold chicken, fresh bread, and a jar of lemonade into a basket, and saddled one of the gentle mares that Mason had told her she could ride whenever she wished. The ride across the prairie was exhilarating, the wind pulling at her hair and the sun warm on her shoulders. She found Mason and Charlie mending fence, both men stripped to their undershirts and glistening with sweat. Mason looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, and his face broke into a genuine smile when he saw her, the kind of open, unguarded expression she had only seen a handful of times. "Hannah," he strode over to help her down from the horse. "What are you doing out here?" "I thought you might appreciate some lunch," Hannah said, suddenly shy under the warmth of his gaze. "It is too hot to eat heavy food, but I made cold chicken." "You are a blessing," Charlie declared, already reaching for the basket. "A true blessing, Mrs. Ziegler." They ate in the shade of a lone cottonwood tree, and Hannah found herself laughing at Charlie's stories about Mason as a boy, tales of mishaps and adventures that made her husband shake his head in mock despair. It was the most relaxed she had seen Mason, and she realized with a start that he was happy. Truly happy, in a way that went beyond mere contentment. As they prepared to return to work, Mason caught Hannah's hand. "Thank you for coming out here. It means more than you might think." His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a small gesture that sent warmth spreading through her entire body. "I wanted to see you," Hannah said honestly. "The house feels empty when you are gone all day." Something flared in Mason's eyes, and for a moment, Hannah thought he might kiss her a real kiss, not the chaste press of lips they had exchanged at their wedding. But Charlie was calling about a post that needed setting, and the moment passed. Still, as Hannah rode back to the house, she could not shake the feeling that something important had just happened. That night, a summer storm rolled across the prairie, bringing violent thunder and lightning that lit up the sky. Hannah woke from restless sleep to find the windows rattling in their frames and rain lashing against the glass. She had always hated storms, and this one was fierce, even by Dakota standards. When a particularly loud crack of thunder shook the house, Hannah could not help the small cry that escaped her. She wrapped a shawl around her nightgown and ventured out into the hall, seeking comfort even if it meant admitting her fear. Mason's door opened before she reached it, and he emerged carrying a lantern, his hair mussed from sleep and concern etched on his face. "Hannah, are you all right?" "I am sorry," Hannah said, feeling foolish. "The storm startled me. I have never been fond of thunder." Mason's expression softened. "Come downstairs. We can sit in the parlor until it passes. I will make some coffee." They settled in the main room, Mason lighting the lamps to push back the darkness while rain drummed against the roof. He had pulled on trousers and a shirt, but left it unbuttoned, and Hannah found her eyes drawn to the glimpse of his chest visible beneath the fabric. She curled up in one of the chairs she had made more comfortable with cushions, accepting a cup of coffee gratefully. "My mother used to hate storms too," Mason said, settling into the chair across from her. "My father would stay up with her, telling her stories until the worst passed." "What kind of stories?" Hannah asked, grateful for the distraction as another roll of thunder shook the house. Mason's eyes grew distant with memory. Stories about their life together, mostly. How they met, their early days on the ranch. The time they got snowed in for 2 weeks and had to ration their food. The first time they saw me ride a horse on my own. He paused, his gaze returning to Hannah's face. "They loved each other very much. I always admired that about them." "You must miss them terribly," Hannah said softly. "Every day," Mason admitted. "But less so since you arrived. You have brought life back into this house, Hannah. Light and warmth and hope. I need you to know that." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Hannah set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. "Mason." Eye lightning flashed, illuminating his face in stark relief, and suddenly Hannah could not remember what she had meant to say. All she knew was that this man, this good and honorable man who had saved her from ruin and asked nothing in return, had somehow become the center of her world. The practical arrangement they had made had transformed into something real, something that made her heart race and her breath catch. "I am falling in love with you," Hannah said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I know that was not part of our arrangement, and I do not expect you to feel the same way, but I needed you to know. You have become so important to me, Mason. When you are gone during the day, I count the hours until you return. When you smile at me, I feel it in my chest. I think about you constantly." And Mason was out of his chair and kneeling before her before she could finish, his hands cupping her face with a gentleness that made her eyes sting with tears. "Hannah," he breathed, and there was wonder in his voice. "I have been in love with you for weeks. I did not think I had the right to tell you, not when you married me out of necessity rather than choice. I have been trying so hard to give you space, to let you come to care for me naturally without pressure, but every day has been torture. Wanting to touch you, to hold you, to tell you what you mean to me, but fearing I would drive you away." "You could never drive me away," Hannah whispered, covering his hands with her own. "You saved me, Mason, and then you gave me time to see who you really are. How could I help but fall in love with you?" The kiss they shared was nothing like the perfunctory press of lips at their wedding. This was deep and searching, full of weeks of longing and restraint finally breaking free. Mason's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Hannah melted into his embrace with a sigh of pure relief. Finally, they were truly together. The storm raged on outside, but neither of them noticed any more. They talked through the rest of the night, sharing hopes and fears and dreams, learning each other in the ways they had been too afraid to before. When dawn broke, pale and watery after the storm, they were curled together on the sofa, Hannah's head resting on Mason's chest and his arms wrapped protectively around her. "Marry me again," Mason said suddenly, his voice rumbling under Hannah's ear. "Properly this time. A real wedding with time to prepare, where you can have a nice dress and we can celebrate with the whole town. Let me court you the way I should have from the beginning." Hannah lifted her head to look at him, her heart overflowing. "We are already married, I know, but I want to do it right. I want you to have the wedding you deserve, the one you should have had before Whitmore proved himself to be a fool." Mason's amber eyes were earnest, pleading. "Let me give you that, Hannah, please." How could she refuse when he looked at her like that? "Yes," Hannah said, laughing through happy tears. "Yes, we can have another wedding, though I think you are being wonderfully ridiculous." "I am in love," Mason said, grinning. I am entitled to be ridiculous." True to his word, Mason set about planning a proper wedding celebration. The news spread quickly through Bismarck that Mason and Hannah Ziegler were renewing their vows, and the response was overwhelming. Women Hannah barely knew offered to help with preparations, and Martha Henderson took charge of coordinating everything with the efficiency of a military general. Hannah found herself swept up in the excitement, choosing fabric for a new dress and helping to plan a celebration that would include dinner and dancing at the town hall. It was everything she had dreamed of when she first agreed to be a mail-order bride, but better because this time it was real. This time, she was marrying a man she loved with her whole heart, a man who loved her just as fiercely in return. The ceremony took place on a beautiful Saturday in August, with the whole town in attendance. Hannah wore a dress of cream silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, and her hair was swept up with flowers woven through it. When she walked down the aisle of the church on Charlie's arm, the foreman having volunteered for the honor, she saw Mason waiting for her at the altar, looking handsome in a new suit, and her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. This time, when they exchanged vows, every word carried the weight of genuine feeling. When Mason slipped a new ring onto her finger, one that fit perfectly, his hands trembled with emotion. And when they kissed, the crowd erupted in applause and cheers, celebrating not just a wedding but a love story that had captured the imagination of the entire town. The celebration afterward was joyous and lasted well into the night. Hannah danced with Mason, with Charlie, with various ranchers and townsmen who wanted to congratulate the bride. Martha pulled her aside at one point, her eyes bright with tears. "I am so happy for you, dear," the older woman said, embracing Hannah tightly. "You deserve every bit of happiness, and Mason does too. You have both been through your share of hardship. It is time for joy." As the evening drew to a close and they prepared to return to the ranch, Thomas Whitmore appeared at the edge of the crowd. Hannah tensed, but Mason's hand found hers, steadying her. Thomas looked uncomfortable, his face flushed with what might have been embarrassment or alcohol or both. "I wanted to say," Thomas began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. "I was wrong. About you, Mrs. Ziegler. You have proven yourself to be a fine woman, and Ziegler is lucky to have you. I was a fool." It was not a particularly gracious apology, but Hannah could see the effort it cost him. She felt Mason tense beside her, ready to defend her if needed, but she squeezed his hand gently. "Thank you for saying so, Mr. Whitmore," Hannah said calmly. "I hope you find what you are looking for someday." They left him standing there and climbed into the wagon, now decorated with ribbons and tin cans by well-meaning friends. As they drove away from town under a canopy of stars, Hannah leaned against Mason's shoulder, feeling utterly content. "Are you happy?" Mason asked softly, his arm coming around her. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Hannah answered honestly. "Thank you for taking a chance on me that day, Mason, for seeing something in me worth saving." "You saved yourself," Mason said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I just gave you the opportunity. You did the rest." The ranch house welcomed them home with warm light spilling from the windows. Bear bounded up to greet them, tail wagging furiously, and Hannah laughed at the dog's enthusiasm. This was home now, truly home in a way she had never quite felt anywhere else. She had traveled over 1,000 miles to find heartbreak and humiliation, but instead she had found love. That night, Hannah and Mason came together as husband and wife in truth, not just in name. There was tenderness and passion, laughter and whispered confessions, the joining of two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Afterward, wrapped in Mason's arms with the prairie night singing outside their window, Hannah felt a peace settle over her that she had never known before. The seasons turned, summer giving way to autumn, and then to the harsh Dakota winter. Hannah experienced her first blizzard, watching in awe as snow piled up higher than the windows, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze solid in minutes. But the house was warm and well-stocked, and she and Mason spent the long winter evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other or simply talking about their plans for the future. They wanted children, they discovered in those intimate conversations. A family to fill the house with noise and joy. Mason spoke wistfully of teaching a son to ride, of watching a daughter learn to bake with Hannah. Hannah imagined the bedrooms upstairs filled with small voices, the patter of feet on the stairs. They both knew the risks childbirth was dangerous on the frontier, but the desire for family outweighed the fear. Spring came late but glorious, the prairie exploding with wildflowers and new grass. Hannah worked alongside Mason in the garden, planting vegetables that would sustain them through the next winter. Her hands grew calloused from labor, but they were the calluses of honest work, and she wore them with pride. It was in early summer, a year after their hasty wedding, that Hannah realized her monthly courses had stopped. She waited a few weeks to be certain, then shared the news with Mason over breakfast one morning, her hands trembling as she spoke. Mason stared at her for a long moment, his face cycling through shock and joy and fear. Then he was out of his chair and sweeping her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Hannah asked, needing to hear the words. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Mason said, pulling back to look at her face, his amber eyes shining with unshed tears. "You have given me everything, Hannah. Everything I did not even know I wanted. I love you so much." The pregnancy was not easy. The morning sickness lasted well into the 4th month, and the summer heat made Hannah miserable. But Mason was attentive and gentle, taking on extra work around the house so she could rest, bringing her cool water and fanning her on the hottest days. Martha visited frequently, offering advice from her own experiences raising 3 children, and the women of Bismarck rallied around Hannah with gifts and support. As autumn painted the prairie in shades of gold and red, Hannah's belly swelled with their child. She continued to work as much as she was able, though Mason fussed over her constantly, worried that she was doing too much. They spent the evenings preparing the nursery, painting one of the upstairs rooms a soft yellow, and building a cradle from wood that had belonged to Mason's father. The baby came in November, arriving during the first snowstorm of the season. Martha and Doc Peters, the town's physician, both made it to the ranch despite the weather, and Hannah labored through a long night while Mason paced downstairs, driven half mad with worry. When the baby's first cry finally rang out, piercing and strong, Mason took the stairs 3 at a time. "A boy," Martha announced, beaming as she handed the bundled infant to Hannah. "A healthy, beautiful boy." Hannah looked down at her son's red, scrunched face and felt love crash over her like a wave. He had Mason's dark hair and a pair of lungs that suggested he would have no trouble making his needs known. Mason knelt beside the bed, his face full of wonder as he reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand. "He is perfect," Mason breathed. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never quite decided. Now, looking at her husband's face as he gazed at their son, Hannah knew exactly what felt right. "Michael," she said softly. "Michael Richard Ziegler, after my father and yours." Mason's eyes met hers and she saw the depth of emotion there. "Michael," he repeated, testing the name. "Yes." "That is perfect." The years that followed were full of the kind of happiness Hannah had once thought impossible. Michael grew from a squalling infant into a boisterous toddler, then a curious boy who followed his father everywhere, wanting to help with every task on the ranch. 2 years after Michael's birth, Hannah gave birth to a daughter they named Hope, a tiny thing with Hannah's green eyes and her father's stubborn determination. The ranch prospered under Mason's management and Hannah's careful household economy. They added onto the house, building a larger kitchen and an extra bedroom. The cattle herd grew, and Mason hired additional hands to help Charlie manage the work. Hannah's garden became famous in the county, producing vegetables so abundant that she was able to sell the surplus in town. Through it all, the love between Hannah and Mason only deepened. They still stole moments together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the sky while their children played nearby. They still talked late into the night, sharing their hopes and concerns. They supported each other through hard times when cattle were lost to disease, when drought threatened their water supply, when neighbors faced troubles and needed help. Hannah became a pillar of the Bismarck community, known for her kindness and her willingness to help anyone in need. She organized charitable efforts, taught Sunday school at the church, and mentored young women who came west as mail-order brides, offering them the support and understanding she wished she had received. Mason served on the town council, using his success to help build infrastructure and protect the rights of smaller ranchers. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Mason surprised Hannah with a trip to Bismarck for a special celebration. He had arranged for Charlie's wife to watch the children for the night, and he took Hannah to dinner at the finest restaurant in town, then dancing at the town hall where they had celebrated their second wedding. "You ever regret it?" Mason asked as they swayed together to the music. "Saying yes to me that day. We had no courtship, no romance, just a desperate situation and a hasty decision." Hannah looked up at her husband, at the face she knew better than her own, at the amber eyes that still made her heart flutter. "Not for one single moment," she said firmly. "That desperate situation brought me to you, Mason. It gave me this life, our children, our home. How could I regret the best decision I ever made? Even though Thomas Whitmore broke your heart first." "He did not break my heart," Hannah said, surprising herself with the realization. "He wounded my pride and frightened me badly, but my heart was never his to break. It was always meant for you." She reached up to cup Mason's face. "You stepped forward when no one else would. You saw value in me when I felt worthless. You gave me time to fall in love with you naturally. You have been my partner, my friend, my love. I would not change a single thing about our story." Mason pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "I love you, Hannah Ziegler. I have loved you since the moment you stood up to Whitmore and refused to let him see you cry. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." They kissed there on the dance floor, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had watched their love story unfold, and Hannah felt the same rush of joy and certainty she had felt that day in the church when Mason first said he would marry her. This was her life, her love, her home. She had found it in the most unexpected way, but that only made it more precious. As the years continued to pass, Michael and Hope grew into fine young people. Michael inherited his father's love of ranching and his mother's stubborn determination, working alongside Mason and learning everything about managing the land and cattle. Hope proved to have a gift for healing, spending hours with Doc Peters when he made his rounds, learning about medicine and nursing. Both children grew up knowing they were deeply loved, surrounded by the warmth and security their parents had worked so hard to build. More children followed, twin boys when Hannah was 32, rambunctious and mischievous in equal measure, and finally another daughter when Hannah was 35. a surprise blessing they named Grace. The house that had once been so empty rang with laughter and arguments, with the sounds of children playing and learning and growing. Mason and Hannah grew older together, their faces gaining lines and their hair showing threads of silver, but their love never dimmed. They still found time for each other, still shared quiet moments on the porch watching the sunset, still held hands across the dinner table when they thought the children were not looking. The children, of course, always noticed, and they grew up understanding what real love looked like, the kind built on respect and partnership, on weathering storms together, on choosing each other every single day. Hannah sometimes thought back to that June day in 1881 when she stepped off the stagecoach in Bismarck, terrified and desperate. She remembered the crushing humiliation of Thomas Whitmore's rejection, the feeling of having nowhere to turn. And then she remembered Mason stepping forward, offering her dignity and hope when she had neither. It was not the romantic beginning most women dreamed of, but it had led to a love more real and lasting than any fairy tale. Mason had not swept her off her feet with pretty words or grand gestures. Instead, he had offered her partnership and respect, had given her time to find her own way to love, had built a life with her brick by brick and day by day. On their 25th anniversary, the whole community gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children ran wild across the prairie grass while adults shared food and stories. Michael, now a man of 24 with a wife of his own, stood and offered a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "You have shown all of us what love really means. Not the storybook kind, but the real kind, the kind that wakes up every morning and chooses to stay, the kind that works through problems instead of running away, the kind that builds something lasting. Thank you for giving us a home filled with love. Thank you for being our example." Hannah felt tears streaming down her face as the crowd applauded, and Mason's arm tightened around her waist. She looked up at her husband, her partner, her love, and saw her own emotion reflected in his eyes. "We did good, did we not?" Mason asked softly, his voice rough with feeling. "We did amazing," Hannah corrected him, rising on her toes to kiss his cheek. "We built a life worth living. We raised good children. We created a home full of love. What more could anyone ask for?" As the sun began to set, painting the Dakota sky in shades of pink and gold, Hannah stood surrounded by her family and friends and felt a bone-deep contentment. Her journey had been strange and unexpected, full of twists she could never have anticipated. But it had led her exactly where she needed to be. She was no longer the frightened woman who had been rejected at the altar, desperate and alone. She was Hannah Ziegler, rancher's wife, mother, friend, and pillar of the community. She was loved and valued, not for what she could offer but for who she was. And she had found all of that because one good man had been brave enough to step forward and say, "I will marry you right now." The years continued their steady march. Hannah and Mason watched their grandchildren born, delighting in each new addition to the family. The ranch passed to Michael's capable hands as Mason slowed down, content to offer advice and spend more time with Hannah. They took walks together across the prairie they both loved, hand in hand like newlyweds. When Mason turned 65, he surprised Hannah with a gift, a journal he had been keeping since their wedding day. In it, he had recorded his thoughts and feelings, chronicling their life together through good times and bad. Hannah spent an entire day reading it, crying and laughing in equal measure as she relived their journey through Mason's eyes. "You wrote that you loved me from the very beginning," Hannah said that evening, looking at her husband with wonder. "Even that first day." "I did," Mason confirmed, pulling her close on the porch swing they had added years ago. "There was something about you, Hannah, The way you refused to be broken by Whitmore's cruelty. The courage it took to accept my offer. I saw your strength and your heart, and I knew I wanted to spend my life with you. I am so glad you stepped forward that day, Hannah said, resting her head on his shoulder. I do not want to imagine what my life would have been like without you. You would have found your way, Mason said with certainty. You are too strong to be kept down for long, but I am grateful every day that you chose to find your way with me. They sat together as the stars emerged overhead, comfortable in the silence that comes from decades of companionship. The house behind them glowed with light and life, 3 generations under one roof now that Michael and his family had moved into the wing they had added. The sound of children laughing drifted out to them, and Hannah smiled. We made something beautiful, she said softly. Out of what could have been a tragedy, we made something beautiful. We made something together, Mason corrected gently. That is what made it beautiful. As Hannah approached her 60th birthday, she found herself reflecting more and more on the path her life had taken. She worked with the young women who still came west as mail-order brides, sharing her story and offering guidance. Some of the women faced rejection as she had, and Hannah made sure they had support and options. She and Mason had even helped match a few rejected brides with suitable husbands, playing matchmaker with the wisdom of their years. The town of Bismarck had grown considerably over the decades, with proper streets and shops, a school, and a new church. But the sense of community that Hannah had found when she first arrived remained strong. She was known to everyone, respected and loved, a far cry from the desperate woman who had once stood alone in the street facing ruin. One spring morning, as Hannah worked in her beloved garden with Hope's daughter helping her plant seeds, she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. A young woman climbed down, looking travel-worn and frightened, and Hannah's heart clenched with recognition. She had seen that expression before in her own reflection 35 years ago. "Are you Mrs. Ziegler?" the girl asked hesitantly. "Mrs. Henderson in town said you might be able to help me. I came out here to marry a man, but her voice broke. He changed his mind when he saw me, said I was not pretty enough." Hannah stood, wiping the dirt from her hands, and walked over to the girl. She saw herself in those frightened eyes, remembered the terror and shame of rejection. But she also remembered what had come after the love and life and happiness she had built from the ashes of that humiliation. "What is your name, dear?" Hannah asked gently. "Lily. Lily Watson." "Well, Lily, come inside and have some tea. Let us talk about your options. I promise you this is not the end of your story. It might even be the beginning of something wonderful." As she led the girl toward the house, Mason emerged onto the porch, taking in the situation with one glance. His eyes met Hannah's, and she saw understanding there, along with pride and love. He nodded once, a silent affirmation that they would help this girl just as they had helped others before her. "We have a spare room," Mason called out. "You are welcome to stay as long as you need, Miss Watson." Hannah felt a surge of love for her husband so strong it nearly took her breath away. After all these years, he was still the man who stepped forward to help someone in need, still the compassionate soul who had saved her when she had nowhere else to turn. She had been so lucky that day, though she had not known it at the time. Thomas Whitmore's rejection had been the best thing that ever happened to her because it had led her straight to Mason. That evening, after Lily had been settled in a guest room and served a hot meal, Hannah and Mason sat together on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The prairie stretched out before them, beautiful in the fading light, and Hannah felt a profound gratitude for the life they had built. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Hannah asked softly. "When you offered to marry me." "I said I knew you had come a long way on faith and courage," Mason replied immediately. That I knew Whitmore was a fool, that I needed a wife and you needed a husband. You saved my life that day, Mason Ziegler." "No," Mason said, turning to look at her with those amber eyes that still made her heart skip. "We saved each other, and then we built something better than either of us could have made alone. That is what love is, Hannah, not rescue but partnership. Building something together that neither person could make on their own." Hannah reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "I love you," she said simply. "I have loved you for 35 years, and I will love you for however many more we are granted." "Forever," Mason said, bringing her hand to his lips. "We have forever, my love." And sitting there on the porch of the ranch house that had become a home, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built together, Hannah believed him. Their story had started with rejection and desperation, but it had become something beautiful, a testament to the power of love, courage, and the willingness to take a chance on each other. Years later, when Hannah was 72 and Mason 78, they sat together at a family gathering celebrating their golden anniversary, 50 years since that hasty wedding in the Bismarck church. The ranch was now run by Michael and his eldest son, but Mason and Hannah still lived in the main house, their presence a blessing to all who knew them. Their children and grandchildren had prepared speeches and toasts, sharing memories and expressing gratitude for the example of love their elders had provided. But it was little Grace, now a woman of 40 with children of her own, who spoke the words that made Hannah cry. "My parents showed me that love is not about perfect beginnings," Grace said, her voice clear and strong. "It is about what you build together day by day, year by year. They met under the worst possible circumstances, but they chose to see possibility instead of disaster. They chose kindness over bitterness, hope over despair, and love over fear. Everything good in my life, in all of our lives, started with their courage on that June day 50 years ago." As the applause rang out, Mason pulled Hannah close and whispered in her ear, "I would do it all again, exactly the same way, just to end up right here with you." "I would too," Hannah whispered back. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy, I would choose it all again if it meant choosing you." They kissed, and their family cheered, and Hannah felt complete. Her journey had taken her from Pennsylvania to the Dakota frontier, from rejection to acceptance, from loneliness to love. She had been a mail-order bride rejected at the altar, and then a rancher had stepped forward and changed her life forever. No, Hannah corrected herself as she looked around at the faces of the family she and Mason had created together. They had changed each other's lives. They had built something beautiful from the ashes of disappointment, something that would last long after they were gone. Their love story would live on in their children and grandchildren, a legacy of courage and commitment and the transformative power of choosing love. Mason and Hannah lived to see their 55th anniversary, still holding hands, still finding joy in each other's company, still very much in love. When Mason passed peacefully in his sleep at 83, Hannah held his hand and whispered her love one final time. She followed him 6 months later, unable to bear the separation from her partner of more than half a century. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, their graves marked by a simple stone that read, "Mason and Hannah Ziegler, partners in life, forever in love." And the family they had created continued their legacy, carrying forward the lessons of courage, commitment, and the enduring power of love that transforms everything it touches. Their story became legend in Bismarck, told and retold to new generations of mail-order brides and frontier families. It was a story of hope in the face of despair, of love found in unexpected places, of two people who took a chance on each other and built something beautiful that lasted far beyond their years. And it all began with one simple sentence, spoken by a brave man to a desperate woman. "I will marry you right now."